This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario.
Hi everyone, it's Rebecca, and unfortunately Tara was unable to be with us today, but I am so excited to introduce award-winning author Michael Christie, who has been longlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize 3 out of 3 times. But today we will be talking about his most recent novel, Greenwood, which will be defended by Keegan Connor Tracy at the 2023 CBC's Canada Reads debates in less than 2 weeks. According to Michael's website, Greenwood is a multi-generational family story in which the unexpected legacies of a remote island off the coast of British Columbia will link the fates of 5 people over 100 years. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Rebecca. It's really nice to be speaking with you.
Great. Well, I am always fascinated with a novel's origin story. So I wondered, how did you come to write Greenwood? This is a question here. But did you know from the beginning that you wanted to tell the story using tree rings as a metaphor and also going from the future to the past and then back to the future? Did you have all of that in mind?
I've finally admitted that my writing process is extremely messy and disorganized and it must be each time I begin a new book. So the genesis of this book was 2 stages. The first was I just had these ideas for characters. I thought I had this sense of this person who finds a baby in the woods. I was interested in a tree scientist. I was interested in a carpenter and a timber tycoon. And that's what I had. And I didn't know why I was interested in these people. And I just sort of started writing around them, kind of getting to know them. But it wasn't until stage 2, when I was cutting down a tree on my property on Galliano, or the property where I was living at the time. And I'm a tree lover, I should say, that this was a difficult thing for me to do, but the tree needed to come down. We had to clear some space for a driveway. And so my sons were there with me and we cut the tree down and looked at the stump after it fell. And I realized that the tree kind of contained its own story within its structure and that the rings of the tree actually resembled pages of a book to me.
Wow.
And I thought, what an interesting way to tell a story, and to begin in the present at the outer rings of the tree, travel back in time through the very beginning of the tree, and then back out to the other side. And at that moment, I realized that these characters I'd been imagining were actually part of the same family.
And so it all just sort of came together then.
It did, and I definitely don't want to overplay the ease with which it came together. After that, it was a difficult 3 years probably following that moment to finally have a novel. But I mean, after I had this conception of how I would structure the story, things came a little easier anyway after that.
I've always wondered about the editing process in terms of how long does that period, or how long, for example, did it take for this book, and how vigorous was it, or was it not a lot of editing? I've always been kind of curious about that side of the writing.
I mean, I'm a dedicated reviser, editor of my own work. And so, I mean, it began right away. I mean, I went through multiple drafts originally, probably 20. And then I get to the point where I'll give it to trusted friends. I have a literary agent who's also a writer himself, and he's sort of my most trusted and most helpful voice in that process. And so I'll give it to him. I think he did like 6 passes on it.
Wow.
And then once a publisher accepts it, you go through rounds of editing with the editor who has bought the book as well. And so there's a whole other round. So, I mean, this book went through the editorial ringer during its life. But I think, I always believe that, this stuff makes a work stronger, especially if you're working with people who you trust and who know what they're doing.
When you get to the professional editor side of it, does it, I know this sounds terrible, but do you get like your feelings hurt at all? Like sometimes if they say, oh, take this out or not, or are you able to approach it with like a little less personal feeling to it, I guess.
That's such a great question. And even after like 3 books in, I'm just finishing my 4th book now. There is always a moment when you get the email back and whoever it is going through the inconsistencies and weaknesses of what you've made, where you feel this flare up. I do, at least, of defensiveness or annoyance, or for a moment you entertain the idea that maybe this person doesn't know what they're talking about. But I really try to get over it as fast as I possibly can. And I think it's very, very important as a creative person to not do anything people tell you, but if somebody who knows you and your work very well is sending you a very clear message,
Mm-hmm.
you almost have a responsibility to really listen to it. So I'm not perfect at it, but I definitely have done a lot of work to receive those messages.
Oh, that's great. Well, speaking of the work, would you be willing to read a passage from Greenwood?
Of course, yeah.
Excellent.
I'm going to be reading from a section that is narrated by a guy named Liam Greenwood, who is a carpenter and living in the year 2008. And this chapter is called Clear. Wood is time captured, a map, a cellular memory, a record. This is why Liam believes carpenters like himself will never go out of business. Because people will always keep wood close in our houses and on our floors, ceilings, and walls, in our trusted canes and our finest musical instruments, in our heirloom tables and old rocking chairs, and most tellingly, in the very capsules that ease our journey into the ground. When carpenters call a piece of wood clear, they mean it is free of knots and wanes and blemishes. And during his many years of fussing over wood, cutting it to exact lengths and lovingly fitting it together just right, all before buffing it to a soul-warming shine, Liam Greenwood has often thought that people like clear wood best because they need to see time stacked together, years pressed against years, all orderly and clean, free from obstruction or blemish, the way our own lives never are.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I have to ask, because you're a carpenter or have been a carpenter in the past, correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
So is that really how you feel about it? Are you kind of Liam in that sense?
In a sense, yeah. I mean, Liam's led a pretty different life than me, but I mean, I certainly found all kinds of emotional resonance in his character and in his struggles, and particularly his musings on wood and time and family and perfection is another thing that he kind of considers as well. So yeah, no, he's kind of a stand-in for me, I guess, in some sense. But I could say that of most characters in Greenwood too, that they're all have some kind of emotional resonance with me personally.
Wow. Okay. Well, speaking of that, our friend Sarah wanted me specifically to ask you if you have a favorite character in Greenwood, and can you talk about, just in general, the craft of creating really compelling characters?
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, part of me wants to say, this is like picking a favorite
Yeah.
child, which I must say, my brother and I have an older brother, and we're very different from one another. He's like a business guy, and our parents passed away, about 10 years ago at different times, but sort of close together. And him and I were talking recently, and I said, that mom told me that I was her favorite kid, right? And he said she told me the same thing. And now she's no longer around to confirm or deny any of this stuff. So that I'd like to think that all of my characters believe that I love them best, is what I'm saying, I guess.
Yeah.
But if I'm forced to pick one, I would say the easy answer would be Everett. But I think someone like
Yeah.
Temple really is a character who I'm very
Yes.
proud of creating, and who just kind of arrived on the page. And, I was very much aware of this like stereotype of the husbandless woman living on the prairie, sort of waiting for someone to come rescue her. And I really wanted to push against that and create a strong, independent person who is committed to helping others and caring for her community. And so that aspect of Temple's character and her resilience and her strength were something that I was just so thrilled to get down on the page.
And then what about, and I will say too, I'm not going to spoil it for anyone who has yet to read the book, but that process, what happens to Temple is one of the most memorable parts of the book. I just really, I don't want to say too much about it, but she was an incredible character, and her story, even though it was much smaller, it was just an amazing part of the book. So, and then just in terms of crafting these characters, I mean, that's really obviously the strength of this book are the characters and how well defined they are and how much we all became to love them. Seriously, when you read about people's reviews, it's all about these amazing characters. So how do you create those characters?
Oh, I wish I knew. I mean, I would just repeat the process, but it's I really just try to write towards people who I'm interested in, people who are struggling, but are human, who are flawed, but are in some sense noble. I think there's, it's scary as a writer to write a character like Everett Greenwood, for example, someone who is kind of sincere and is, a kind of this uncelebrated great person who is sort of buried by history. But it's that those are the people that I really gravitate towards. And, in certain characters I'd had in my mind for a long time, for example, Jacinda Greenwood, she was one of the earliest I imagined. But then other characters like Liam Feeney showed up on the page as I was writing the scene. Like he walked in the door and just started talking, and there was Harris smitten with this man as much as I was at the time. So it's kind of a mix of planning out certain characters you want to get in, and then also just waiting for some of them to show up.
I love hearing authors talk about that, where you won't have a character in mind, but then they'll just sort of show up on the page. And that does it sort of, I mean, I know this might sound silly, but does it feel sort of magical when they appear that way?
It does. And I mean, I don't want to overplay my own, the power of my own imagination, but often I think, your brain is a lot smarter than you are, and a lot smarter than you think you are. And so, often there's kind of work being done in the background almost. And, there's certain points where your brain will just kind of present a solution or present a consciousness even that it's been sort of assembling behind the scenes, which I find is just such a fascinating part of the writing experience. And it's sort of just, I mean, it would be very boring to, and I'm sure some writers do it this way, and I don't want to knock them, but to go into the writing of a book as a preordained exercise in just building this thing that you already know how to make. I really love the process of discovering the mysteries as I'm writing, rather than having them prescribed before I write.
And do you do an outline and all of that, or do you just sort of, what's your general process?
Oh my goodness, this book. I mean, I had the tree stump, so I was halfway there. No, I was really complicated, and there were timelines all over my working area, my office. I had, it looked like I was trying to catch a serial killer or something. It was just like completely wild. And, and lots of the editing process was, fixing certain aspects of one timeline so they lined up with other timelines. So for example, when Harris Greenwood burns half of Greenwood Island, I wrote that much later in the process. And so I had to go back in all the other sections and change that, sort of like a time travel movie, to make everything line up. So yeah, it was a really tricky process to actually make the book hang together. And I had a lot of great people to help me do that.
Yeah. Okay, so with Canada Reads just around the corner, I am curious how you think Greenwood might shift a reader's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great list of books, and I being a non-competitive person at heart, I'm really trying to do my best. But I think that Greenwood can portray, hopefully we'll leave the reader with a greater sense of our interconnectedness, both with one another and with the natural world, and really hit home the importance of building community, finding family, caring for one another and for the environment, as a way of surviving on this planet, which we haven't done so well at thus far. But I think it's an argument for interconnectedness ultimately.
One of the best parts of the book that really hit me hard was the point at which I can't remember which characters were talking about it, but that, every generation thinks the worst that it can ever be is now. And I have to say that I have this doomsday view of our world when it comes to climate change, which is like my number one thing I'm concerned about. And yet there was a point in the book where somebody mentions and says, well, we always think it's the worst time, and that, maybe it's not the worst time. Maybe it's just something we're going through. So how do you feel about that? Is it like, where do you stand on that, I guess, if that makes sense what I'm asking?
Oh, absolutely it does. And I think, the climate anxiety is something I experience every day. And
Hmm.
Greenwood was very much a response to that feeling. But I mean, one of the great parts of researching this book was delving into the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, and realizing, like, oh my goodness, the world seemed like it was ending at that time as well. And it really was for many people. Or, to think about even something like the oil crisis in the 70s,
Hmm.
these were very precarious feeling times too. And, while that doesn't excuse the way that we're treating the climate, and the kind of delaying that we're doing with respect to the solutions, it's still, I think it's important to put things in perspective and to keep us from catastrophizing to the point that we're paralyzed. I mean, because we must act, we must do what we can to mitigate the damage. But if you think of what it was like to be living through World War II, I
Hmm.
mean, that must have been pretty scary too. And so,
Yeah.
we have to remind ourselves to be brave and to seek solutions.
That's exactly what that did for me, because I've just been living. I think I've been catastrophizing things for so long that really, when I read that part of it, I just it helped me just put a little bit in perspective for a moment. And I thought, okay, I think we're going to be okay. I think we just have to keep finding solutions and keep working toward it. So that helped me a lot. So thank you for
I,
that.
I
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, it helped me too. Writing that down, it felt momentarily relieving. Yeah.
Yeah. So now it's my perception, I'm going to be clear, it's my perception that more and more creative and gifted authors are coming out of British Columbia. So is there something in the water or the trees out there that we should know about?
Well, as you know, being among trees increases your creativity, I think, by 10 or 20%. So maybe it's that. I really don't know. You're right, though. There are so many great authors out here in BC. I think in Canada, Toronto kind of exerts this power over the publishing industry. So maybe we're a little bit kind of removed from that, and we can just sort of get down to business out here. I'm not sure what it is exactly, but I'm very grateful to live in this part of Canada. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And then just last, I don't know if you can or want to say anything at all, since you mentioned that you're writing something new. Is there a time frame that we might see something new from you?
Yeah, I mean, I thought this book was going to be done a little while ago, but that plan has changed. But I will say that it's feeling very, very close, and it is the story of a small fictional island, a different one off the coast of BC, where a tourist young woman goes missing, and then this sort of history, the complex history of the island, gets dragged up as a result of the search for her. Ooh. And it also has a lot of climate related stuff involved as well.
Excellent. It sounds fabulous. Do we think we'll see it in 23 or 24?
Oh, I hope you see it, really, but probably not in 23. Okay. It's probably safe to say. Yeah.
All right. Well, Michael, thank you so much. We are really excited. I agree with you. No book should have to be in a competition really in this manner with Canada Reads, but we love it so much. The competition is so much fun. We did talk to Keegan. We think she's really going to be very well prepared, and we're excited for Greenwood to be part of the competition. And we wish you luck in that, and also with the new book. And just thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Oh, thanks to you, Rebecca. And yes, I think having something like Canada Reads to generate conversations about books in the gigantic way that it does is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. And so, yeah, I'm very, very grateful to be a part of it, and to have Keegan arguing on my behalf, because she is brilliant, and she's going to do an amazing job. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. And thank you so much for this conversation, Rebecca. It's been great.
Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style, and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.